I looked at the front page of a number of news websites today. Politico, latest news column, 2 stories about Donald Trump and his looming presidency, and 3 stories about Elon Musk. Financial Times top stories feature 1 story about Donald Trump, 1 on Elon Musk. The Telegraph, 1 story about Trump, the lead story about Elon Musk. Various people, including me by the way, who predicted that the Trump-Musk relationship wouldn't last for the entirety of the term of office, did so on the basis that Donald Trump hates anyone being more high profile and talked about than he is. Well, still early days. But right now, Musk is like a jackrabbit on amphetamines, almost as though he's daring Trump to prove his critics right. And these are not in relation to his businesses. Sending people into orbit, putting driverless cars on the road, all of that kind of cool stuff. It is political muscle flexing. He's picking fights with the UK government and campaigning for one of their more controversial opponents, picking fights with the German government and campaigning for one of their more controversial opponents, and indeed picking fights with some of the most devoted MAGA supporters who disagree with him on immigration, to the point where he's demonetized a bunch of them and kicked a few of them off the platform altogether. I get the feeling that if we were going to do a blow-by-blow account of who Musk outraged this week and why, we'd probably end up doing nothing else through 2025. This seems to be a very high-powered attention-grabbing machine. And yes, that's supposed to be Donald Trump's job. We're not going to cover it every time, of course, not least because most of it is performative and not serious, but it does raise questions of principle about what this power is that we're seeing being exercised here, and how could it indeed be held to account. Now, it can't just be that Elon Musk is very, very rich and inclined to financially support political outcomes that favour his interests, because lots of people do see that as problematic, but it's hardly new or unique to Elon Musk. From George Soros donating to Democrats in US elections and a variety of progressive causes, through to the Koch brothers funding conservatives in elections and a different variety of mostly right-wing causes, although they also supported Obama's work on criminal justice reform. Lots of people find those sorts of activities problematic, usually only the ones that support the opposite side to them, to be fair. But if you accept that wealthy people can fund politicians in America and a range of political causes across the world, you can't really complain just because it's Elon Musk who's doing more of the same, albeit a bit more noisily than the others. But then it's not just noisy. It's also pushing things to a scale that you inevitably have to ask, did this just cross a line that we hadn't spent a lot of time before working out where it was, because we didn't have to ask ourselves before? How much money can you donate to a political candidate or a party before you've de facto bought them? And do we think that should be a problem? Do you think it'd be a problem if it was the other guy's billionaire? Because I know we've become almost incapable of framing general principles that we think should be held equally to both sides, but surely it is what we aim to do. Different countries have different attitudes, of course. In the UK and in Germany, there are rules strictly restricting what foreign agents can do to influence an election, including how much money they can donate to a candidate. Generally, very little indeed, bearing in mind that in the UK, the political parties have tight restrictions on what they can spend at all in election times. In the 2024 election, the Conservative Party spent £16 million, which American political parties would see as a rounding error, frankly. To point out the obvious, you want rules that prevent the most egregious things that you don't want, without having to make value judgments and exceptions. We don't want, for instance, China to be influencing the UK's elections. We don't want Putin's Russia or a Russian oligarch to be doing so either. It's easier to frame that in terms of restricting all foreign agents, none of whom bear the consequences of those national elections after all, from having such influence. Elon Musk showed every sign of understanding this principle when he objected to the news that the UK Labour Party was sending volunteers to help the Kamala Harris campaign. "This is illegal," he said. Actually, it wasn't, because it was volunteer time, not cash donations, and it was a practice that both sides routinely have done through recent history. But the principle that there should be very strong guardrails to prevent foreign interference in elections, that was the spirit of what he was expressing. It's hard to see any interest in such guardrails in how Elon Musk himself has been injecting himself into the political affairs of others. Musk has called for the UK to have another general election 6 months after it just had one, because he doesn't like the result of the last one, and there are bad opinion polls against the government now. Would he suggest the same system for the incoming Trump administration, one wonders? Probably not, I'm guessing. No democracy in the world functions like that, of course. This week, Jess Phillips, the safeguarding minister, did what the Conservative Party also did before her, to decline to have a new national inquiry into grooming gangs in Oldham between 2011 and 2014, requested by Oldham Council, telling them instead that it should commission its own inquiry. There was also a national overarching inquiry into child abuse, which reported in 2022, and local independent inquiries and reviews, including in Telford, Rotherham and Greater Manchester. She was suggesting Oldham should do what those other local councils had done. Well, it turned out that Elon Musk had an opinion about this. Jess Phillips, he tweeted, is, quote, "a rape genocide apologist," and separately said that she deserves to be in prison. Which is an interesting legal theory, that if a minister decides not to hold a public inquiry, whether we feel that was a good decision or not, that's a prisonable offence somehow? Kind of veering into French Revolution territory there, Elon. Next, Musk was arguing that Keir Starmer was actually responsible for gangs getting away without prosecution because he had been the former head of the Crown Prosecution Service. Historically, this is not entirely accurate, as even the Daily Telegraph admitted when it noted that it was indeed Starmer who gave the green light to prosecuting the Rochdale grooming case, the first of its kind. But Musk suggested that Jess Phillips' action was somehow to protect Starmer from such an inquiry becoming about his conduct as CPS head, which wasn't even suggested as the remit for the Oldham inquiry. Let's be clear, the activities of grooming gangs in the UK, which mostly took place more than a decade ago, a lot more than a decade ago, let's not imagine there's nothing to be done today, was an astonishing, depressing and outrageous failure. There's lots to be said about it, some of which has already been said since the first Times of London exclusive by Andrew Norfolk in 2012 and various inquiries and subsequent exposés that followed. The police failed to act at the time because, in the wake of various reports accusing the police of institutional racism, officers were terrified of being held up as racist because the perpetrators in that case were all Pakistani. Indeed, the Times of London, when it published its extremely compelling and well-documented journalism, was, at the time, called racist and Islamophobic for even pursuing the investigation. Attitudes have changed a bit since then. There's no complacency to be had about how certain moral attitudes lead to inconsistent standards being applied by the police and all sorts of other agencies. It's a debate and a tragedy that frankly deserves better than to be suddenly resurrected out of nowhere, specifically to be used as a political football against the current government. The original reporter, Andrew Norfolk, noted when the story first appeared that certain groups jumped on it who had no interest in solutions. They were just interested in exploiting the situation for their own political ends. This incident has arguably been a repeat of exactly that phenomenon. And the point is that the factor that made it happen this time was the huge exposure and the very sharp focus given to that exposure by Elon Musk. Now, maybe that's fine, but at least let's ask the question, is it fine? The UK government is softballing it. The Health Secretary today said that Musk had faulty information, but he would welcome it if Elon Musk wanted to roll up his sleeves and help to increase child protection in the UK. This highlights Keir Starmer's dilemma. He wants desperately to be able to establish good relations with the new Trump administration. Musk's hostility is most important because Musk is influential with Trump, hence they won't slap him down, they won't push back. They hope that they can just sweet-talk him into changing his mind, or at the very least not pushing the case with Trump. Good luck with that, is all I can say. Also, Elon Musk has called for Tommy Robinson to be released from prison. Robinson's currently serving time for deliberately and repeatedly breaking the terms of a court injunction. Contempt of court is not something that is treated lightly by the courts, unsurprisingly. But Musk has decided he should be freed, and this is important given that he is a figure likely to be of influence with the incoming American administration. He said that the US should exert economic pressure on the UK to get him out. Think about the implication of that for a moment. Regardless, again, of what you actually think of Tommy Robinson, the individual, the idea that government should interfere in the independence of the UK judiciary, because Elon Musk, who has no stake in the UK system whatsoever, remember, thinks that it should do so because reasons. As always, if your feelings about that are clouded by how you feel about the individuals concerned, just swap some faces and names around and see if the same principle seems as attractive then. Ironically, Musk's focus on Tommy Robinson must be causing some consternation with his other new British pal, Nigel Farage of Reform UK. Because Farage famously has no time whatsoever for Tommy Robinson. Indeed, he previously resigned from UKIP in 2018 precisely because of Robinson's influence there. So if a guy possibly lining up to give Reform £100,000 turns out to be similarly influenced, yeah, tricky. Likewise, the Conservative Party has also criticised Musk for, quote, sharing things that are factually inaccurate and distance itself from his call for Phillips to be jailed. Alicia Kearns, the Tory shadow to Jess Phillips, said that Musk was drawing away attention from the survivors and from the victims of rape gangs. So that's the UK. Musk has also turned his attention, of course, to Germany. Germany has an election coming, and there's little doubt that its current unpopular government is almost certainly about to get booted. Only the AfD, the party described by many as far-right, can save Germany, says Elon Musk. Now look, lots of people get triggered by any use of a phrase far-right these days because there's no doubt it's been overused and massively abused. But the fact that in the eyes of some journalists and commentators, everyone who holds an opinion they disagree with gets labelled as far-right, that annoying tendency alone doesn't abolish the reality of actual far-right xenophobic racist groups. Germany feels particularly sensitive about such elements expressed in its politics for what you might think were obvious reasons. Now look, maybe it's time for them to move on, to accept that the modern European populist right movements are substantively different to the German Nazis that for so long defined Germany's shame about its past. Maybe. Or maybe they're right to be vigilant. Since I'm not German and I'm not immersed in the reality of day-to-day German politics, I would explore what various participants have to say on such questions. I don't think I would leap in with a strongly held view of my own. But leaping in with a view, however, is Musk's new superpower. Firstly, his view of the existing government is only slightly better than his view of the UK. Chancellor Olaf Scholz is a fool, he says. German President Frank-Walter Steinmeier is anti-democratic tyrant. Shame on him, he says. No record of Musk having suggested Xi Jinping of China, which is a key market for Tesla vehicles, is an anti-democratic tyrant, or indeed Vladimir Putin, but I expect he'll get round to those in due course. Then he added to this with his suggestion that the AfD is the only hope for Germany's future. As a result of his commentary, Musk ended up doing an editorial for Welt, which was accompanied with a second opinion piece putting the opposite view to Musk's. All the quotes I give now come from a Google translation of this piece, which I have no reason to think isn't accurate in its meaning, but just so you know. Musk's case for the AfD came down to this: economic freedom, reducing overregulation, cutting taxes and deregulating the market is essential if Germany is to regain its industrial strength, he says. Immigration and national identity. Immigration should be controlled and German culture and security preserved, he says. Energy. Reverse the disastrous decision to phase out nuclear power and instead rely heavily on coal and imported gas, as well as volatile wind and solar power. He added the question, how could the AfD be far right when its leader, Alice Weidel, has a same-sex partner from Sri Lanka? Does that sound like Hitler to you? Come on. That was his case for. So what was the corresponding case against, written by journalist Jean-Philippe Burgard? First, he said Musk's diagnosis of Germany's problems were correct, but the idea that the AfD was the answer was wrong. The AfD says it considers Germany's exit from the European Union to be necessary. But for Germany, which is an export nation, he said this would be catastrophic. Germany benefits, he says, from the internal market like no other. More than half of its exports go into it. The AfD, he points out, is also antagonistic towards the United States, saying that the geopolitical and economic interests of the USA are increasingly different from those of Germany. And yet, he says, 10% of German exports go to the US. The AfD is pro-Russia, calling for the immediate lifting of economic sanctions and a repair of the Nord Stream pipelines to resume the flow of Russian gas. The AfD has more friendly words for China than it has for the USA, he says. And finally, he says, the Germany mainstream right party, the CDU, agrees with the diagnosis but avoids the AfD's extremist positions. And he adds this: if Musk thinks that classifying the AfD as right-wing extremist is clearly wrong, he is making a major mistake. The AfD is not just Alice Weidel, but also Bjorn Höcke. The latter can be described as right-wing extremist by court ruling. Höcke has also been convicted several times for using a banned Nazi slogan, "Everything for Germany." Sounds like Hitler, he says. Now look, we have seen in Europe the growing phenomenon of former extreme right-wing parties detoxifying themselves, or attempting to do so, to become capable of hitting the mainstream. Giorgia Meloni has forged this path in Italy, helped by the fact that she has proven in practice to be an extremely capable politician. Indeed, now she's the only major G7 leader with the wind at her back, arguably. Her example is being attempted to be followed by Marine Le Pen in France. Whether that will be successfully or not, still to be decided. Is the AfD then another such party? Well, it could choose to be. My perception is that it remains some way away from that. I'm mindful that the founder of the party left in 2019, quoting the party's anti-Islamic and xenophobic views as the reason, and that the former leader Jorg Murphy left the party 2 years ago, saying that the party was not based on democracy and had totalitarian overtones. Also, the ID group in the EU expelled the AfD from its ranks after the AfD's Maximilian Krah excused the actions of the Nazi SS. And Marine Le Pen and Giorgia Meloni very clearly have been going out of their way to keep their distance from them. So, while being aware that I know very little about German politics, noticing those things would certainly prevent me from making any suggestion this is a party that is consciously on the detoxification route and is simply being maligned and done down by its detractors. So, that's the foreign government tally so far. UK, Germany. And then finally Musk has picked another fight. All at the same time, because he really has been a busy boy, with some of the most die-hard MAGA supporters, which you might think was an odd choice of target. It all came about because of a row over H-1B visas. MAGA purists such as Steve Bannon and Loomer said that such visas were bad. They're just a vehicle for bringing in foreign workers to do jobs that companies should be training Americans to do. An extension of a reaction against illegal immigration to a much more blanket disdain for all immigration, legal or not, high-skilled or not. Well, Elon Musk, who, after all, entered the US originally on exactly such a visa, had strong thoughts of his own. And he said this: "The reason I'm in America, along with so many critical people who built SpaceX, Tesla, and hundreds of other companies that made America strong, is because of H-1B. He then advised his opponents in this discussion to take a big step back and have intimate relations with their own faces, which makes Trump sound positively consensual and calm in comparison. And he finished by saying, "I will go to war on this issue, the likes of which you cannot possibly comprehend." Steve Bannon, who called for a complete moratorium on all immigration, suggested that Elon Musk and the other tech bros are recent converts to the MAGA cause and should sit and take notes rather than lecturing other people. "If you're going to do that," he said, "we are going to rip your face off." Or not. Donald Trump pulled the rug from his advocates by telling the New York Post that he was rather in favour of the visas, having used them many times himself. In the meantime, Musk, champion of free speech that he is, demonetised a number of the Twitter accounts of his MAGA critics, something which provoked howls of protest and attacks from them. Blue tick verification badges were revoked, all the benefits of having a premium account were gone. Nick Fuentes was one. He tweeted, "Twitter censorship is back. Free speech is dead." And he wasn't the only one. Musk let it be known that freedom of speech didn't mean freedom to get paid for it, so tough. And Laura Loomer was equally blunt. "Tech billionaires are like termites who have descended upon Palm Beach to infest and rot from within. They don't just want to replace your jobs, they want to replace the MAGA agenda by hiding and eating away at it as they multiply from within, just like a termite infestation." So, what to make of all this? Since the election, since becoming the designated co-leader of Doge on behalf of the Trump administration, Musk has proactively picked fights with the UK, with the German government, with MAGA activists on immigration. He also, by the by, slapped down Robert Kennedy Jr. in support of Ozempic and similar obesity drugs, of which Musk is a fan and Kennedy is suspicious. One newspaper reported that Donald Trump was, quote, "annoyed" at Elon's antics. It's hard to tell if that's just journalistic wishful thinking, because, the media is currently doing things like calling Musk the co-president, which seems calculated to try to provoke Trump into the response they would most like to see. But given what we know of Trump, it's hard to imagine he wouldn't be feeling it somewhat. I mean, in the weeks before Christmas, it was all about Trump, setting in place his cabinet and his other key picks, preparing to go back into the presidency, all the various world leaders adapting their own plans and positions in anticipation of his arrival. Since then, it's all been, "Look at me," from Elon. Not about, as I said, going to Mars or self-driving vehicles or even US budget trimming, but foreign and domestic politics, areas well outside his remit. Well, we will see how it plays out. But the point is, we now have the wealthiest man in the world, one heavily associated with the incoming US government, one responsible for certain key strategic businesses, putting stuff into space, satellite communications, all of that. Picking fights and campaigning on behalf of certain types of political parties in foreign countries, using his huge social media platform to promote his views. Because bear in mind, his account's tweets are promoted heavily, way more than anyone else's. Using that platform to campaign against certain figures, freely spreading things that turn out to be wholly or partially false without the slightest apology or concern. It's like he's a toddler who, from his parent, Daddy Trump, has learned that big statements leave an impression, a lasting impression. It's Trump's campaigning superpower. If those statements turn out not to be true, so much the better, because it means people talk about them all the more, and the impression they create remains, regardless of whether they turn out to be true or not. Post-truth politics. Having learned that, Musk is trying out this new superpower and delighting in the impacts he suddenly has on the world, and he just can't get enough of it. It feels like the moment in the movie when you know that what the protagonist is doing isn't going to end well for them. There's too much hubris, too little maturity in how they're wielding their newfound power. The only question is just how, and indeed how much, it's going to go wrong. Plenty of those in the MAGA camp have seen Elon as the very best thing after Trump, and all he does therefore being beyond reproach, until the exact self-same approach gets turned against them or in favour of a cause they hate, which brings us back to the point all over again. These are principles that should hold up whether you support someone personally or not. Is America an oligarchy? Are we happy about it? A Russian-style kleptocracy even, where the powerful get to change the rules or bully others to get the outcomes that benefit them? Or is there a mature approach to accountability, alongside that encouragement of entrepreneurialism that we wouldn't want to lose? A principled balance which means nobody gets everything they want, regardless of the public good. Personally, I remain a fan of SpaceX and Tesla as well, although I can't quite get what people see in the ugly as anything Cybertruck, to be honest. But this other stuff is arguably an important and rather loud part of the current process of democratic decline. It needs to be called out for what it is by everyone.